In this video I'm gonna show you how I recreated the Battle of Hoth. We all remember the iconic Battle of Hoth from The Empire Strikes Back. I loved this sequence so much that I felt like I just needed to make something related to this epic battle. And well, there you go. I'm gonna show you step by step what I did, but first let me tell you some fun facts about this PSD. Its final size was 1.53 GB, which is pretty big. It has 60 smart object layers and 46 adjustment layers and other internal layers. That's a total of 106 layers, and that's without everything that's inside the smart objects, so I think it would be safe to say that this document has about 150 layers. Then also this document has 145 smart filters, so do realize I counted all this. Now, without any further ado, let's bloody go. I started with a blank document, obviously, and I added my first two images, these mountains. I cut them out and added another mountain image. I duplicated that and moved them to the sides to cover the entire width. Then I removed the lower parts of these mountains because I knew I was gonna put the surface underneath it. Now I added a foreground, which I already cut out. I copied it and added some layer masks to make sure it looks like one thing. Then to fill up the gap in the corner I added a nice rock. I made sort of a haze by making a new solid color and painting on his mask with a soft brush. Now it was time for the surface. I dropped this new image in there, copied it, moved it to the right and removed the top parts. In the left corner I added another rock image, which I then cut out with a layer mask. Then I added another image, which I cut out too. Then I added another image, which I cut out too. Now I decided to start with the sky. I dropped an image of a dark cloudy sky and copied it to make it stretch out to the left side. Behind the mountains in the back, I did that same haze effect again with a solid color. Then I used levels to take away some of the dark tones and used color balance to make it look bluish, plus some brightness and contrast on the right image to make it go from dark on the left to brighter on the right, and also blurred it a bit with blur gallery. Now I started color grading everything a bit. I gave the mountains in the back some levels to remove the blacks, color balance for the blue tones, brought down the opacity to 47% and blurred the whole thing with gallery blur. For the ground I used pretty much the same, vibrance, levels, brightness and contrast to make it brighter and color balance to make it bluish. For this one I also used sharpen to make it a bit sharper because, well, it didn't really quite match the rest of the image when zoomed in. For the mountains in the middle I added those same effects too, but different values to give it the right distance. Exactly that same process for those rocks in the back, vibrance, levels and color balance. And guess what? That same bloody process for these other rocks. Obviously the values are all slightly different from each other because what's in the back shouldn't have as much dark tones as the foreground. I used a few clipped adjustment layers to change some of the lighting on these rocks. I was pretty sure my light came from the top right, so I tried to recreate that. The blend mode of those adjustment layers was set to luminosity because I only wanted them to affect the lighting and not the colors or anything else. For those shadows, I also used exposure adjustment layers, which I painted a nice shadow shape on. Also their blend modes was set to luminosity, and from now on every time I say exposure adjustment layer you can pretty much assume it's on luminosity. I also wanted to add an iron cannon that we see in the original movie, so I found this image. I dropped it underneath that haze and I removed the bottom. I used levels, color balance and vibrance for the colors and blur gallery to slightly blur it. Then I added a new exposure adjustment layer to make sure the light came from the right side. I fixed the color of the foregrounds now with vibrance, levels and color balance. And before we go and add our first AT-AT, let's take a break and let me show you some fun facts about the ice planet Hoth. Did you know that the diameter of the ice planet Hoth is 7,200 kilometers, which is about 4,400, which is about 4,473 miles. If you compare that to the size of the Earth, which has a diameter of 12,742 kilometers, it's this size. And did you know that the real-world filming location on Hoth was in Finns, Norway? Now you do. Let's get back to the breakdown. Boom! There's our first AT-AT, the mighty creatures that once ruled the Earth. Oh, wait a second. I fixed its colors with levels and color balance. That wasn't quite enough, so I clipped a solid color to the vehicle and made a nice soft haze at its legs? Then I dropped in another, which I instantly cut out and color corrected the same way as I did with the first one, levels and color balance. I also added that same haze again. That whole same idea happened for that final AT-AT. Then I wanted to add some ATSTs, since they were also very much there in the movie. So I found these two images and put them in. I masked them out and used levels to take away some dark tones and color balance and vibrance for the colors. They obviously also needed shadows, so to make those I used an exposure adjustment layer and painted the shadow on its mask. Now that the whole thing was kinda overflowed with the Empire, I figured we needed some good guys, so I found this turret that we saw in the movie too. I masked it out and added some levels, vibrance and color balance. Then to change the lighting, I added two clipped exposure adjustment layers, one for the highlights and one for the shadows. To make the AT-ATs look bigger and more massive, I added one more in the foreground. I did the same color correction and everything and made a shadow with an exposure adjustment layer. To give the image some life, I decided to drop some snowtroopers in there. I pretty much used the same stuff again for those, levels for the black, color balance for the color, and for the lighting I added two adjustment layers per subject, one clipped for the highlights and one alone standing for the shadow. The lack of small detail annoyed me, so I added some weird snowflake type orbs behind that foreground snow image, and to enhance that a solid color to make a nice haze. To me, 4 AT-ATs, 3 stormtroopers and 2 AT-STs against one cannon seems kinda pathetic. So I added a snow speeder, you know, those flying vehicles that they use to take down that AT-AT in Empire? I removed the background and used vibrance, color balance and curves to make it bluish and levels to take out some of the black. The original image didn't have that orange colors, so I had to do that myself by adding a clipped hue and saturation adjustment layer. It seemed pretty not moving, so to make sure it doesn't just drop out of the sky, I added motion blur. For this, and that's actually very interesting, I copied the speeder, added Blur Gallery's motion blur and used a layer mask to only show it at the back of the vehicle. Then those little white lines, that's just a solid color with lines painted on his mask. Then I added another speeder and repeated that exact same process for this one. And it still isn't really a fair fight, so I dropped another cannon in there and the color correction, you can guess that by now. Then I dropped in yet another snow speeder and now it seemed like a legit scene. Except it didn't, because there's like 3 people and they're all bad guys, so we'll fix that later, because the most important thing in a battle are explosions. I added this beautiful colorful image and made it look less beautiful and colorful by using vibrance and color balance. To make it actually lit, I added a real explosion, set its blend modes to screen and erased some areas to blend the two together. I copied that whole thing, moved it, rotated it, scaled it and decreased the opacity, but I needed more action, more explosion, so I used another colorful explosion, masked away the bottom and used vibrance, levels, color balance and brightness and contrast to match it with the rest. Oh, and I also added that same explosion again. That explosion is a light source, so that means this snowtrooper should have a red-orange highlight. I did that with a clipped hue and saturation adjustment layer. I needed more bloody explosions, so I dropped in some new images and I added the same bunch of smart filters that I added to the previous 10,000 things I did. But what I said a few minutes ago, there are only 3 snowtroopers and no rebels, so I fixed that in a very interesting way. I simply searched for soldier brush and Brushizi had some. I created a new solid color and used my brand new soldier brushes to make some tiny soldiers in the back. The little shadows are painted inside that same solid color too, just with a little less opacity. Then I copied that big explosion there and dragged it all the way to the left right here. But nobody was actually shooting anything, just some random explosions and badass people and vehicles don't really make a battle. That's why I painted some white laser beams on there and turned on outer glow, which is located in layer styles. That looked okay, but it really needed that red, so I added a glow by making a new solid color, setting its blend mode to linear dodge add and painting with a very soft brush over the beams. And that actually really helped and reminded me to add a highlight by clipping a hue and saturation adjustment layer to that turret to make sure the lighting is right. So now that everything is pretty much in place, it's finally time for the legendary Camera Raw filter. And I'm not gonna get too in depth on this filter, but I did make sort of a flowchart of my raw settings. And there are a few things to point out. I generally increased the highlight and lighting and removed the 100% black with curves. I tweaked some of the colors and split zoning is the main key to the blue color I added. As you can see, I made the highlights as well as the shadows sort of a bluish color, and that's why it really pops nicely in the final image. I also added some grain, but for the rest it's not very important. Now, do realize that these settings might not look great on your picture because it reacts differently to every image. Chances are it's gonna be pretty ugly, so wait, actually let me try that.
A few moments later.
Well, Yeah, but okay, so that's pretty much the whole process. That's how I recreated the Battle of Hoth. I personally really love this project, and I had the idea to keep making these ultra-wide Star Wars battles. So what iconic Star Wars battle should I make next? Let me know in the comments. And boy, there are so many options. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to hit that like button, and if you like my content, feel free to subscribe to my channel and ring that bell so that you, my friend, don't miss anything. Then I hope I will see you in my next video.